What is your full birth name?
Tisha Marie Cardoza.
And were you named after anyone?
My first name, Tisha, comes after a soap opera star. I think it's Tisha Gerber or Garber or something like that, that my mother fell in love with the name. My middle name, Marie, comes from both of my great-grandmothers. So both of my mother's grandmothers were named Marie or Mary, a version thereof, and that's my middle name.
And when and where were you born?
I was born on October 28th, 1978 in Selma, California.
And when did your family, more or less your ancestors that immigrated from the Azores, about what time frame did they immigrate from the Azores?
So I am Portuguese on my mother's side, and her maternal side came over the earliest. They came over in 1889, settled here in Selma, bought a ranch, started growing grapes, and we still have the ranch today. On the Cardoza side, which is my mother's paternal side, they came over in 1910. So all of my grandfather and all of his siblings were born here. For my grandmother, she was born here. Her father was born here, because that's the Silva side that came over, like I said, in 1890. So I'm far removed from the Azores on both sides a little bit.
Do you know which islands they came from?
They all came from Peak. All came from around Silveda, the Lajes area. So.
And do they ever talk about, and your grandparents, why their parents left the Azores, why they left, the major reason?
My grandmother, her grandfather that came over on the Silva side, better opportunities. He came, he made his settlement, he found the fields, he did his farming, and before he left the Azores, he had some friends who had 8-year-old daughter or something like that at the time, and he goes, I'm going to come back when I have a place to bring her, I'm going to come back and marry her, and that's what he did. He went back, they married and brought her over, and they had all of their 4 children here, so quite an age gap between my great-great-grandparents on that side, and they always were farmers, so it was just a better opportunity. On the Cardoza side, my great-grandma there, she was a Betancourt. She came over with her parents. They came over through Ellis Island and all of that, and it was the same thing, just looking for better opportunities. My great-grandfather Cardoza, it was during the war, and it was a way not to have to go away to Angola or wherever, I think is where it was at the time. So he came over, probably the latest of all of them, and it was to avoid having to be shipped off. He decided to come here because his brothers were here. He was one of 20. And so a few of them had already made their way, so he just decided to make his way as well.
Did your grandmother and your grandparents that you mostly had contact with, did they ever talk about their parents or their grandparents making any references to how it was to adapt to the new country?
Yes, obviously the language barrier. They all only spoke Portuguese, and my great-grandma, Mary J. Silva, her maiden name was Xavier. When she came over, they pinned a paper to her shirt saying, "Deliver me," basically, to Selma, California. And so, by the grace of God, really, she found her way to Selma. And it was because of that, and as well as with both of my grandparents, only speaking Portuguese in the home, and then going to school, they had such a hard time transitioning that they made, unfortunately, but I understand why, they made the decision not to teach their children Portuguese. They felt they were helping them out by making sure they only spoke English at home, so they didn't have to go through the trials and the tribulations of adjusting when they went off to school. So I find that a disadvantage, and I was raised by my grandma, and even though I was a little more removed, I learned words here and there, but she never had, I don't know, I don't want to say it wasn't a desire, but it was just she didn't see the need for me to learn Portuguese because I was in America. I was basically going to live in America, and I didn't really need to know any Portuguese. Plus, I think she liked the fact that she could talk to her cousins about me or about stuff, and I had no clue what they were saying. So I think that's the real reason.
How important do you feel it was for, as you said, you were raised by your grandma and lots of connections with her. Of course, how important to her was it that you be raised although not learning Portuguese, but with the Portuguese culture?
That was very strong. I was raised, because I was raised by my grandma, and back as a child, there was, I think, roughly 7 Portuguese fraternal organizations at the time. We belonged to every single one, and I was down in this hall at least twice every week for one of their meetings, as well as far as when it came to the hall, I had to come down and work. I had to volunteer, depending on my age level, whether it was I'm just taking out trash, or I'm serving plates, or I'm helping stir something. She was down here working, I had to be down here working. So the festa became really important, had to do the little queen thing, the big queen thing, side maids, flower girls. I think as soon as I could walk, she had pictures of me being at least a flower girl. And then I've served here as little queen, I served here as senior queen, and then eventually I became the president a ways back. But the Portuguese culture was always endeared to her, and that was something she did want to make sure. And I think she was somewhat disappointed that her children kind of didn't really show the enthusiasm that she did. They were there to support her. She was a grand president of the Brotherhood of St. Anthony. They went to her convention. They helped her fundraise. They did those types of things. But as far as actually ever taking an interest and doing things even at a council level, my mother was the only one that really took the interest. For example, not anymore, but when the hall burned and it needed a new roof, my mother actually re-roofed this hall. And she served, ran the bar, did the sodas, which oddly enough are my same jobs now. I run the bar and I do the sodas at Festa. But she was always down here working anytime they needed to work. So my grandma had 6 children, and she was the only one that really took an interest in the fraternal aspect, which was the tie to the culture, especially here because we're a small community. So we don't have a Portuguese soccer club. We don't have, we only have our one festa here. We don't have bakeries, restaurants, or anything. It really just came down to the fraternal organizations that luckily found their way to Selma one way or another hundreds of years ago, or over 100 years ago, all of them, I think now. And then eventually formed the hall and brought the small group that was here in Selma together.
So would you say that her insistence by her involvement grew within you throughout the years?
Yes.
And as you became older, what drives you to stay in touch with your roots?
So yes, all of my involvement stems from her. As a child, I was not as appreciative, as I will tell you. I have grown now that I'm in my 40s, early 40s, that is. But it was just, coming to those meetings at the hall for whatever organization it was not fun. But I enjoyed the bigger things like the visits and seeing relatives, seeing fraternal family, because you do build those bonds. It took me until probably 4th or 5th grade to realize that all these people she had me calling aunt and uncle were really cousins. And I was just so confused when you have that 5th grade family tree project. And I was like, how's Aunt Mary? She was, well, she's not your aunt. She's your cousin, but you need to call her aunt. And I was just so confused. And then just the friends that she had developed that were introduced as family. So that Portuguese fraternalism turned into a big, broader family, which in my later years, luckily, because I kept into it, especially with SPRSI, I had to move away for work. Work sent me to San Mateo for 2 years. A past Grand President, Caroline Silva, took me in, what was supposed to be short term. I lived there with her for 2 years, but if I wouldn't have had those connections through the Portuguese culture and then the fraternal organizations, which how I expressed my Portuguese culture, I would have been thrown into a city for the first time ever leaving Selma and not known anybody. But it was such an easy transition for me. And I remember going to work and there were lots of us that were repositioned, for lack of a better word. And everybody was struggling, and I was completely fine because I had a fraternal family, an extension of my family, so it was no different than being at grandma's house, And it was great. It was a great experience, but had my grandma not pushed me to be in the fraternal organizations, I would have never met these people and would not have ever had a family that goes well beyond my bloodline, so to speak.
Let's talk a little bit about the hall. So the Selma Portuguese Hall. Tell us a little bit about the initials, what it means, and a little bit of the history that you know, and I know you know quite well
Sure.
about the Selma Portuguese
Of
Hall.
course. SPAA stands for Selma Portuguese Azorean Association. It started around 1907 as a IDS council. So it was originally an IDS hall up until the 80s. So I don't know much if the hall changed. Well, I know it changed names. So I don't know if it's just IDS Council 76 Hall up till then. But it started as the IDS Hall. Their thing was their devotion is to the Holy Spirit. So they started having the festas. So our festa history, our books as SPA go back to, I believe it's 84, 85. And before that, it's IDS, which is now PFSA. So I know what happened is the hall had a fire and it burned. And when the IDS council was looking for funds and ways to, how they were going to rebuild, etc., there was a smaller group within there that was like, well, why can't we do this on our own? It's basically the story I've been told through the years. And so they just kind of broke away from IDS. And that's when they formed the SPAA. So I'm not sure how they came up with the name, other than they were all from the Azores. All of the families, I think, mostly come from Peak. My Uncle Louis was part of that. My grandma was part of that there in the 80s when they all decided to break free. So what they decided to do was they would take over the hall, but IDS carried the loan for them. And I remember going to those meetings where it's like, okay, loan payments due. We need to make money. And so it was a big push on not just the festa. The festa was not meant to be a fundraiser here. It was meant to give back to the community and truly keep with the spirit of St. Isabel, which is important to all of us, myself in particular, but my family, because that's where I get it from. It was important to make sure that St. Isabel was recognized here and the festa was put on for the community. So they paid the mortgage more from the fundraisers, the New Year's Eve dance, the wine tasting. I remember them doing breakfast, all things I had to work at as a kid. And that's how they knew it was like a balloon payment kind of mortgage. So they had till the end of the year to save all their money and make that payment. And I remember being at the meeting when they were all here and they signed that last check and they were just so excited that they had finally made it, and that was roughly right before I think the IDS merged, which would have been 2010, I think. So I want to say it was maybe 2007, 2006 that they finally, everything was squared off. They had paid off IDS and it was truly now free and clear and just the SPAA hall.
Describe to us what is a festa?
A festa. So a festa, so it starts with the history, goes back to Queen St. Isabel selling her crown and wanting to feed her people. So for us here in Selma, the festa is feeding the people. We feed them on Sunday. Our festa is Trinity Sunday. And we usually do 3 feedings. Because of COVID, this year we had a more reduced festa. We did 1 feeding. But typically we have 3 feedings on Sunday. And the whole community comes out to eat. We may not see them at anything, for the entire year, but they come to eat the sopes. And so it's a year's process to plan is what the festa is. So it's more than just, I guess, from an outside point of view, we actually had a gentleman come and film us one of the years I was president. He was doing his own little thing, had always been here, kind of wanted to know. So he did this little video of us that year. And, it gave me a different insight into our festa. Because festa, for most people, they just see, oh, it's a band. It's a parade, you go to mass, you have dresses and capes, and then you come back and you eat, and then there's a dance and you eat some more, so that's kind of the outside of it. But it's the purpose of it, which is Queen St. Isabel and keeping her tradition alive. I was always taught that we have to honor St. Isabel and keep her tradition of feeding the poor, feeding her poor people, with us because our relatives were in that group. And had she not been so generous and fed that, my family has always felt that we may not be here. So that's why the connection with the hall and the festas, has always been so close, because that was instilled into my grandmother, who instilled it into me, that without her generosity and her kind heart back in 1200 something, 1100 something, very well our ancestors would not have made it through, and we would not be here today. So it's kind of our payback as a thank you to her, that we do, for at least for my family, that we do the festa still.
In your perspective, how important is the festa within the role of the total Portuguese American experience in California, Portuguese community in the Valley?
I think it's key. I think it's so interesting. You and I were Portuguese, but full-blooded, or you go to Ancestry and you're only 42.3% or whatever it may be. So you're immersed into it already. You already know what it's about. You just grow up in it. But it's so amazing. So it's important. It's the core of the Portuguese foundations. Because that's where everything started. When they came over, there were festas here before there were fraternal organizations. It was everybody getting together. I can only imagine all these immigrants who may or may not have known each other, but they start to talk and they start to see this new land they're in, and that's how they come together. It's the festa. It's my grandparents met at a festa, and that's how they got married, and that's why you're all blessed with me today. But that's so many people's stories. It's my great-grandparents' story. They went to a festa. So I think without the festa, most of us may not be here, or we may not be, maybe the right percentage of Portuguese, because without the festa for our grandparents to go to, they might have ended up marrying, which wouldn't have been bad, but marrying someone outside of the Portuguese culture, and then, it just gets diluted. But one thing with the festas, even though if you're not Portuguese, but I think it's, I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, but maybe the kudos to us is the fact that we put on a festa, and I'll speak for Selma here, even on our committee is maybe half Portuguese people and half people that married Portuguese people. But they, not just a love for their spouse, because trust me, that's not enough to do the hard work that it takes to run the hall or run the festa, but they start to fall in love with the culture. And how great is it to be able to say, look, we're Portuguese, we do this for the community, but people start to fall in love with our culture, and they want to learn our language, and they want to learn more about us, all because we put on a great meal one day a year and invite everybody to come as basically a giant thank you for all of our blessings throughout the year.
Since you've been involved ever since you can remember, as you said, your grandmother dressed you up and you were part of the festa court. How have you seen, or has there been any evolution in the festa in the last 30 plus years?
Here in Selma, I would say not so much. I mean, there's been some adaptations, but when you look at festas elsewhere, you start seeing kings. We never had a king here. We still have not had a king here, but I see it coming, to be honest with you, because the young ladies that want to put on a wedding dress and wear a hot cape in 100 and some degree weather that we're blessed here with some days for our festa, and march to church and march back and do the same thing over and over and over several weekends in a row till the fall comes. Then they go to school, then they start all over again after Easter, the whole cycle. We're seeing a decline. It used to be, I could say, when I wanted to be queen, every year my grandma put my name in, I was kicked out because I was too young. Not too young. The way we select our queens here is in October at our board meeting, you bring the names. So you bring the names, and it's decided based on whoever is the oldest. And we do 3 years out. So every year my grandma went to put me in for little queen, I was beat out, so I got the following year. Same thing for senior queen. I got beat out twice, so I was quite a little bit older being a queen. I was graduating high school when I was queen here in Selma in 96. That's the only reason I remember the year, because it's the same year I graduated high school. But I was more older than you had seen at the time, but it's because I was born later in the year, I was always bypassed, or there was always someone older. So, but there used to be a fight, not a literal fight, but a fight to be queen. Now it's like, okay, we need a queen, who can we go ask? And we're actually going out for the most part and trying to bring people in And like speaking for right now here at this moment, we don't have 3 years of queens like we normally do. So we're starting to have those discussions of, do we go with one queen? Do we potentially start, I said at a meeting, I said, I can give you a king because I have a godson that would love to dress up and probably walk down to church because he loves to be Portuguese. But I said, that's all I can provide you from my family because we all have boys now. We don't have any girls. So you see the decline. So I think we're going to start to see some changes in that way as far as maybe who represents us. The festa here, we've gotten not as far as the population coming and eating and participating with us, or even praying the rosary with us when we do it for the week, but the other towns that come. I remember when I was queen in 96, we had like 13 other towns. It was a big thing. Now our average is maybe 5, So there's less towns coming. And I know it's because they're going through the same struggles we are, getting the younger generation to, again, at least for the girls, to get them to want to dress up, make that commitment, and do all of those things. So I think there'll be a lot of changes for festas going forward. I mean, you might just see our flags might be presented at one point. You might see things like kings, like you see in some of the other areas already. So I like the fact that at least I'll speak here for Selma, but I think it's kind of across the board because as we've done some of the PBBI sessions you had over the summer during COVID, and we had a lot of things about the halls and stuff. And a lot of the common things, it was at least my biggest takeaway from being a part of those panels was seeing that we're not the only ones. Here we're struggling to get more people involved and keep people with us that other areas are having the same issues, and that way we can actually start to learn from each other more, and I can come to Selma and say, okay, we can't find a queen, but you know what, Riverdale, they're doing the king thing. It's time for us to adapt to do the king thing. Or maybe we're the leaders and we start opening that door to say, all right, we're going to expand it, we're going to change our bylaws, and we're going to go outside of, has to be a female of Catholic faith, that has made her first communion in order to be our little queen. And same thing, a young lady of Catholic faith who has made her confirmation in order to be our senior queen. We might need to start looking to adapt there in order to make sure we have at least that representation. But I think at the very least, festas, if they were to evolve and they lose that piece, you're always going to have the social aspect, and you're going to have the food, and you're going to have at least that gathering. So you at least have the main core.
Do you see the festa, and as here in Selma in particular, do you see the festa as just a Portuguese? You kind of answered a little bit in a different way when it comes to the queens, of opening up to other ethnicities. But do you see the festa, and here in Selma, do only Portuguese people participate, or do you have people across different ethnic backgrounds that compose the city?
It is definitely other ethnic backgrounds. As I said, here in Selma, the Portuguese community, it'd be interesting to see. We did that census, make the census to make Portuguese count. I'd be curious to see, when the data gets all broken out, how many people here actually associated themselves with being of Portuguese descent. Because as far as what I know in my little bubble, I probably could count the people that identify as Portuguese descent that I know that are Portuguese and live in Selma, probably on maybe my hands and my toes, but it's so small. Our committee here is made of people from Hanford and Fowler and Riverdale. Actually, I think myself and Erica are the only ones that actually live in Selma anymore that actually are board members and come to all of the meetings. But we have always relied, since I was a kid, I can remember my grandma, I knew festa was coming around, because as a kid you follow the school calendar and all you were worried about is when it was over and when it started. But I knew festa was coming when my grandma would go and literally pull out of her closet this little cardboard cigar box that probably had a little bit of tape on it by the time she was done, because she had to use this cigar box. And I knew that meant she was about to get the ribbons from the festa, she was about to get her little receipt book out, and she was going to go and make her rounds in the country around the house to all of the Portuguese people, get their donations, And so I knew Festa was coming. But besides that and the financial means, Selma has always, at least I can speak back to the 80s for myself, has always relied on the community as a whole when it comes to the helping with some of the funding. Yes, we have dairies, and they have been very generous to us, but again, when I was queen in 96, I think we had 13 cow donors. Now we have 5. Actually 3. 2 are people that just donate money in memory of someone. They weren't really even part of the dairy industry. They're actually raisin farmers. But we've always relied on, the Mexican restaurants in town. They give you those gift certificates, the Chinese restaurants in town, the jewelers, everybody here. There's not one Portuguese business in Selma, other than maybe Rosa's Pizza. But they all participate as far as, we're never hardly ever rejected when we're like asking for something to auction off or raffle off. And then those are the same people that come, so you see the Chinese people, you see the Hispanic people, and they're so excited to get the sopes, and it's like, it's different as an adult than a child. As a child, going to festas to represent either Selma as a side attendant in the court or whatever it was, I was tired of sopes by the time you're done with the 8-week process or whatever it is. Usually Pismo we kind of stopped, Pismo was fine to go to because that was at least the beach and we were escaping the heat. But, as a kid, I didn't appreciate the food. Now, especially with the COVID that happened, it was like, man, I'm actually craving it and I can't have it. And so it made you appreciate it even more. But as an adult, seeing the people, even though I'm working and whatever, but to see the people and to see them be happy and to get those Facebook messages now and to see the Facebook posts, going to Selma Festa, food was great as always at Selma Festa, gives you more of a sense of pride.
Your grandmother was, as you said, driving force behind your involvement and from the cigar box, all of the other great stories. But what is the role of women in festas? Was your grandmother an anomaly, let's put it this way, or were there always lots of women involved in your history of festas in the last 30 plus years?
So the last 30 plus years, I can definitely say there have been some women. Back when we were IDS was founded male only. That's why you had the SPRSIs and the UPPUCs that came about to be females only. And I think it was roughly when we had our centennial here, my grandma was still alive, and she put together a rough history between IDS records and our records. And so roughly in the 1960s, when IDS let in women, that's when women became more part of the festa outside of cooking. You would see them out there cooking, washing pots, cleaning, all the things that today, if someone would seem as very non-politically correct. But that was the role of the Portuguese female in the festa up until about the 60s or 70s. So here I can remember going to board meetings, and it was predominantly male, but my grandma was not necessarily an anomaly. She was, however, the only she was not the only, but she was the first female president of this hall, and that came roughly in 98. I was the second in roughly 2014. Since me, I served for a few years. I think I served 4 or 5 years. Then after me was another female president, and our current president is Constance Brazil, and so now maybe we see even a different trend in that regard, that maybe women are taking more of a role. In fact, when I think of what composes our board today, of the 11 people, I think 8 are female and 3 are male. So a great tide, But I can remember, at least during my time, that I roughly remember from the 80s, there was always roughly 5 to 6 women that were active in the actual board realm, in the actual officer position realms and stuff like that. So.
Let's talk a little bit about SPRSI, which means Sociedade Portuguesa da Rainha Santa Isabel, so the Portuguese Society of the Holy Queen Isabel, and you've been very involved in SPRSI, Sociedade Portuguesa da Rainha Santa Isabel. Tell us a little bit about, I know you know some of the history of it in a nutshell. Tell us a little bit what drove these women in a time that was very, very male dominant society, and all the societies were male that existed at the time and male only, to begin a Portuguese lodge only for women.
Yeah, so SPRSI, Sociedade Portuguesa Reina Santa Isabel, was founded in Oakland on March 15th, 1898. And it was founded by 30 women. And basically it started as an altar society at St. Joseph's Church in Oakland. And they saw the IDS forming, or the IDS was already here, UPUC was already here.
These were all male lodges.
They were all the male lodges. PCU, the Continent, which all formed Luso, the men, and they formed for the purposes of funeral things and helping each other out, etc. But the women saw this, and it took that little group, and one in particular, her name is Rosa Oliveira. She's what we consider our founder in SPRSI. She was very thought-ward thinking. I mean, here you are in 1898, you have horse and buggies, you don't have a profession outside of the home. Your goal is to leave your parents' house, get married, have children, raise the children, help raise your grandchildren, and then just continue the cycle on. Or you might help on a farm or something like that, but you didn't really have your own identity. And we have a past grand president, Bertha Madeira, and I remember her speeches, and they were always about this. And she would say that, the greatest thing a woman before 1960 could aspire to be was grand president of the SPRSI, because there was no world for you. Well, there was no way for you to show an independence, to have a title, to be in charge of something, to have those leadership roles, because women couldn't even vote yet. And here we are with the SPRSI having an organization where you met, you formed councils, you had a convention that had to be put on, you're selling insurance, you're bringing more women in, and we were women only. They're traveling by horse and buggy from Eureka down to San Diego and everywhere in between. And it's just amazing when you think about it to me. It's definitely one of the histories I love very much, because I always looked, when I was president, I had a car. I could get anywhere in the state within roughly 3 to 6 hours, but for them it was 3 to 6 days. So if they had a visit in Eureka where I can get there in a day, they would have had to plan that trip days, if not maybe weeks in advance, to get there, because a lot of them didn't have cars. The train system didn't go everywhere. And even if you got to the train to one point, you had to have a way to point B. There were, the communication skills, letters is how they were doing it. And it just amazes me how they were able to put, an organization that is now 120 plus years old together with just those 30 women. And I would have loved to have been, there when they sparked the idea. We're told that basically after an altar society meeting, she gathered them up and was like, look, we can do this too. Let's show them we can do this too. And it was all just learning. I would imagine they didn't have a lot of help from, the other organizations that were out there, maybe their husbands or whatever. They had to do everything on their own. And it took them roughly 3 years to finally get to the point of being able to have an actual convention and have a president, of which Rosa Oliveira is our first one. And it's just amazing what they accomplished, and way before their time.
Do you feel that young Portuguese American women know this story enough about it? Even the ones who have maybe a policy or had their grandmother or mom buy a policy?
I'd say no, unfortunately. But the same goes for, I guess, really any fraternal organization, probably. But at least for SPRSI, I can tell you today we have roughly 3,600 members. But as far as those that are still active and that might know the histories and all of that, I would say it's honestly less than 100. And where the lack is, if it's just a lack of not maybe sharing it enough, or maybe just like thinking back to when I was a child, I loved the stories but that was because my family had enrooted me, and I had a particular connection with Saint Isabel. And I mean, that became my confirmation name, was after Saint Isabel. So it was a matter of, just kind of normal for me. And being raised by my grandma, I have a different mindset, which I am proud of, and I'm very grateful for. But I'm not your typical, probably in this area. If you were to take, I think I had 2 Portuguese classmates my whole time here in Selma, starting from elementary school up. If you were to bring them in, they're in totally different worlds, outside of when they were queen here. No affiliation with any Portuguese organization, the hall. They went on to have a career, got married, just took on a whole different life. But me, because I was raised by my grandma, I have fiscal policies that are very different than my generation. And I have the culture and just a variety of different things. So I'm very grateful for her, and very grateful to organizations, especially like SPRSI, that eventually allowed kids to join in the 60s, and therefore created youth groups that I could participate in. And eventually, as a kid, it would have been funny and would not have meant much, or people wouldn't have understood it. But my goal was always to be grand president of the SPRSI. It took me to 2008 to do it, but I will be forever their longest president because I served 2 years. But,
Have you ever been to the homeland of your ancestors, to the Azores or mainland Portugal?
I did. A few years ago, so it would be 2016. So in 2015, there's a confraria in Portugal that looks over the monastery where my patron, Queen Saint Isabel's body, lies. And they reached out to us because the monastery was in some repair. And back in, I think, 1950s, SPRSI paid for and used to send money to maintain this window. It kind of fell to the wayside when we had our merger. Everybody kind of forgot that we were sending this tithe every year to make sure the window was always in good repair. So they reached out and they found us through Facebook. So luckily we have Facebook these days. Reached out, ran across Angie Brazil, actually from Hanford. She reached out to me, and I was like, okay. So I reached out to them and was like, hey, what are we doing? And they're like, oh, well, we have this window, and you guys presented it to us, and it's in repair, and we're going to be celebrating this, the 500th anniversary of her beatification to becoming a saint in 2018. And we'd like you to be a part of helping us to restore it. So we took it up, and we raised the funds, and we got it repaired. But we had the honor of going back there, and they allowed us to walk in their procession and be part of the celebration that they do every even year for Saint Isabel. And it was just so moving because the streets, as they say, these are the same streets. They're not paved over with asphalt and stuff like here. They're still the cobblestone streets, and the people, as you're carrying her image, they're trained to walk a certain way so that she sways, and it's walking, and it's just so majestic. And I encourage everybody to go if you get a chance. So whether you just want to go and see it, it's always around her feast day, around 4th of July. And just to see, and all the people that come out just for her to go into Coimbra, and they take her image from her new resting place, and they take her down to the church, and they go by her old resting place, and it's just amazing. So that was my first experience, because when they said, oh, we only do this every even year, I was like, well, I don't have many even years to do it. So we put it together, and we had a small group that went, and then I went back and I took my godmother in 2018. That was 2016. I went back in 2018, and because I took my godmother, we went to the Azores. So that was my first experience with Peak. Going to Piku.
How was that? Traveling the streets of your ancestors.
It was
Your great-great-grandparents.
It was amazing. It was to see, because so much hasn't, I know things have changed. The houses there, at least some of them, but not all, they have TV, they have electricity, they have, cable, running water, all those kind of things. But the architecture, when you look at the buildings themselves or the homes themselves, and just see the rustic look and the appeal, and it's like, just to envision their day-to-day lives, but then the forethought they would have had to have as well, and at least the aspirations and the goals they set for themselves to actually want to leave this and go off to somewhere that they knew nothing about. That when I compare what we have here in the valley to the island over there, I mean, it's apples to oranges. You know, the cows still roam free over there. Here we pin them up, all kinds of things.
Did the visit affect you as far as your cultural ties?
It did. It definitely gave me a love for wanting to go back. I was very disappointed with COVID that I could not go back, but I will be going back next year. And I plan to go back as often as I can, you know, even to the point of where, you know, potentially looking at the property there to make it, you know, maybe when I retire, you know, I can go there and, you know, at least spend more time, spend an entire summer where I don't have to work or whatever. But definitely, and just the feeling, you know, for never having been there. My grandmother had only gone once, and she had gone early 80s. I think right around the time they got electricity, if I remember her story correct, at least where she was going to visit her cousins anyways. So just to see it and to see the difference and the people, you know, they didn't know who I was. They clearly knew I was American, but just how welcoming and inviting they were, and, you know, the food I ate, as well as just the, you know, going to all of my godmother's relatives' house, and, you know, them giving you a bottle of their aguardent and being like, okay, I need to slow down, and seeing their festas from here. And that's why I believe things kind of, you know, take a cycle and they come in turn. So over there are no queens, there are no capes, there are no fancy dresses. It is literally about paying your homage, giving your honor to whichever saint it is. If it's Saint Isabel, if it's Saint Anthony, Bom Jesus, San Miguel, whichever saint they have developed their patronage to, that's the honor. You know, yes, there's flowers and there's food and there's mass, but I think we may see here, maybe we got a little too American, and, you know, where we try to outdo, one queen tries to outdo another, and you got to have a fancier cape, and you have to have a fancier dress. And if you go back there, you just realize how simplistic that the whole thing was meant to be, about just feeding the people and honoring a saint and being thankful for what you have.
To what extent, Tisha, do you believe that being Portuguese American has shaped who you are as a person?
Oh, wow. You know, it'd be hard to imagine to be anything else, but it has definitely given me a work ethic that, you know, I have seen in my ancestors, knowing what they had to do to come over. So I have a very strong work ethic, to my detriment, based in the American culture sometimes, because it's just such a passion. You can't tell a Portuguese person you can't do something. We will show you we can do it. And I think that's a little different than maybe, you know, some other cultures, or just the American in general culture that we have, especially with what we've seen during these COVID times, and how we see employment issues and different things like that. You know, Portuguese people, whether it's to milk a cow, whether it's to work 9 to 5, whether it's to run a vineyard, whatever it is, you have your job. You don't feel complete if you're not working, you know. It's just part of us. So I think Portuguese people have a very strong work ethic, and so I definitely see that in myself, as well as a love for the culture, the religion. I think has definitely groomed me into the person that I am, always wanting to be successful and always wanting to have a family tie. I mean, Portuguese people, I mean, you and I, you know, we're cousins somehow, it's got to be. But when we did those panels, you know, I was on one of your panels, and this woman sends me a message afterwards, were you just on the panel of Denise Borges? Yeah. She goes, we're cousins. And I said, great, we're cousins. She goes, from Selma, the Raisin people. I said, yes, we're the Raisin people. But it's just such a family connectivity. And I know other cultures have something similar, but my personal dealings with other cultures, you know, dealing with like my spouse's family, who is English and German, you know, they don't have that strong family tie that I see like on my Portuguese side. where we all gather. And you may not see someone for a long time, but if they need your help, I think that's part of the Portuguese spirit as well. We're going to help you. They are, as far as a culture, they're always wanting to help. And probably we all get it from St. Isabel, because she wasn't going to let her people suffer. We're not going to let people suffer. We are very generous, so I find myself to be very generous, be it financially, be it sweat equity as they call it. I think that all comes from being Portuguese. I think if there was, if I hadn't been raised by my Portuguese grandmother, or, it definitely had her influence if I had been raised in a, more common home, so to speak. But I don't think I would have had those ethics. And we just recently had the dinner here for my uncle, my great uncle, and I was talking to my cousin, and it's looking around the room, I was explaining to her that this is the village that raised me, because I was raised by a village. Much like the stories I hear in the Azores, it wasn't mom and dad that raised all their kids. Sometimes the aunt came in, the grandparents came in. You hear the story of there were a lot of us. I went to go live with my aunt that had no children, but you were all still family and you all helped like a village. So I was raised by a village here with my great aunts and my great uncles, because my grandma, she was older and she did her best, and I'm always grateful for what she did for me. But she raised me the best she could, and I am definitely the person because of her. And she is who she was because she knew the struggles that her mother had with coming over and her grandfather had with coming over. So she never let us forget that foundation, those roots. And it was always about hard work, giving back to your culture, your community, and always helping people in need. So those, I think, are some of my greatest attributes as a person, and definitely come from the Portuguese side, so to speak.
Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to add?
No, I think we've covered it all. I probably talked too much. You probably are good there. But, and I appreciate the opportunity. I really do. Like I said, we're a small community, so not many people, know Selma, let alone know the hall here, know the festa here, know our history, know about us. But, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And I also commend you and the PBBI and Fresno State for doing all of this, because, I'm 42 years old, and this is the first thing of anything like this here, probably not even just for our culture, but just in general, really, where you're preserving things. And I can only imagine the people that'll be looking at this in 100 years and comparing it, and to see the similarities, between my story and their story, the hall story and where the hall is then and there. And, maybe the history got lost, but someone might run across this as they're doing a humanities course or something there at Fresno State, and they're going to have to go to the library and pull this up, and they're going to be like, hey, I'm from Selma. I didn't know this. And it's just great. It's all around great.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
My pleasure.